This is interesting because I've been taking some notes as you're talking. Wine is farming.
It
It's
is
really what it
fancied up
started
farming.
as.
Yep.
Yeah, what it started as. I don't think the consumers know that most wine farms are just that. They're not wineries, actually. They sell their grapes to a variety of wineries, and a lot of them start out. I can't tell you how much wine I taste here that started as, we used to farm grapes, we sell them to Silver Oak, we sell them to Cambridge or something, and now we make our own wines. And that's probably not a good idea, but it happens all the time. When I go to the wine shop, and I went not too long ago to the supermarket, my wife hates it because when I go to the supermarket, I veer off to the wine section and she's out trying to shop and I'm, screwing around checking the prices. But at the local Vons in the beach area here, every single wine had a shelf talker, which is, for the listeners, one of those tags that hangs down and it's got the point system. And I'm looking at it trying to pull myself back being in the industry, and I know much of the wines I've tasted there, but how do I figure this out? I mean, I'm looking at a shelf talker. How do I know? Isn't it confusing to all these ratings and everybody's got a rating now?
And they're all over 90.
They're all over 90. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess you can find anyway, but is that the same in Canada? And how do we as consumers try to sort through all this?
It is. There's many issues associated with that. It's a great question. So every wine has a rating now. And I think it's because wine is unlike so many other products we buy. We can't try it usually, at least legally, before we consume it.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're going on the label most of the time. You can try on a dress or a suit, you can read the first chapter of a book, but you can't open that wine. And so then the externals start to matter a whole lot more. The label, the shelf talker, and most of us are too intimidated to talk to liquor store staff, even though they could be a great help. And I suggest that as much as you would a sommelier in a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're down to. And so the liquor store wants to sell every wine it buys and puts out there on the shelf. So it's going to look for the highest scores it can from whatever source. So it loves every wine, but you necessarily won't. And even if it is a 92 or a 94, you might not like that wine. So what I recommend to my students and podcast listeners and so on is find someone whose palate lines up with yours.
Mm-hmm.
So that you know that when that person gives it a 92, it's something you're going to like. Because there's a lot of grade inflation going on. I mean, there's crazy scores now where everything's getting a 98 or a 99 from certain sources. But you have to learn, is that a trustworthy source? Or at least, do I trust it? Does my palate line up with that person's rating and score? And then beyond that, the final tip I always give is, make sure you're looking at the words, not just the numbers, because it might be a 94 for Beaujolais, but you don't like light red wines.
That's a great point.
Yeah, look at the words. Do you like light versus full-bodied? Red, well, red versus wine's pretty obvious, but do you like lots of mouth-watering, juicy acidity, or do you like something that is a bit calmer and not as juicy? You got to look at the words too, not just the numbers.
I think that's a really important point. If we're trying to experiment, trusting the description of this rating system, and I think you're right. I think if you can choose the rating system that you like, if it's a Spectator, Enthusiast, James Suckling, and now there's some new ones out there. And I just started, frankly, with wines that I think are really good. Not every wine I think the consumers and listeners should know is rated. I mean, it's a conscious decision to get your wine rated. And there's a lot of political reasons why you would or wouldn't do it. You might be afraid to get a bad score or a low score, and you can't publicize that. But you have to send those wines to the rating system, to whoever is rating the wines, and you have to wait for the publication to come out. And so most wines are not rated, particularly small boutique wineries just don't bother. So you may not see everybody with a rating, but I think it's important to know that that there's some consistency amongst the ratings. And if you're talking about James Suckling, he is not tasting all the wines that are rated themselves. You can't. He's got hundreds, probably thousands of wines to taste, and he has a panel of guys that do it for him, just as he started at the Spectator. But I think finding a consistent source of what you like and what you trust is an important way to do it. The way we've been doing it at our office now, well, it's always been the same premise, but never publicized, and so I started calling it Tuesdays Tastings. So if you see a TT around, you can be finding this very important thing. And we do score everything. Everything I sell has got a 90 plus rating from me, because I'm not rating it against the universe. I'm rating it against its peer. So
Yes.
other $20 Cabernets, this is a 98 because that one's an 88.
So you're
So it's
factoring
sort
the
of
price, yes.
factoring the price, looking at that shelf, and saying, okay, all those $20 cabs, that's a 98. This is a 75. And so it's a slightly different approach, because I do get customers asking, why'd you get that wine at 98? I didn't like it. I'm like, well, amongst other $20 Cabernets, it was worth it based on what I taste. But I can't please all the palates all the time.
No, you can't.
It's impossible.
But
So
I think, Paul, that people will follow you and your individual taste, which is a good thing. Now, there's lots of tasting panels where you get a group of, I don't know, 8 to 10 people, and they come up with one score. And to me, that drags wine down to an innocuous middle ground that I don't think serves anybody, because you're going to get the person on that panel who loves that juicy, acidic Riesling, and then the one who thinks it's too tart or whatever. And I just think that's why in the wine world, we know individuals more than we know panels. Like, Robert Parker, he was so famous as a US wine critic.
yeah,
But, who is the tasting panel for Wine Enthusiast magazine? I'm not sure. I mean, there are certain names that even, contribute to these magazines, but I think wine is such an individual experience that, for me at least, you need to find an individual whose palate lines up with your own and trust that, rather than a sort of communal consent of that, as I say, beige middle ground of everybody sort of liked it, but no one in particular.
I think I told you the story. There was a Cabernet came by here, a few months ago, and I really, really liked it, and it hadn't been rated, never been sent in. So I contacted the broker. And in America, we buy wines through wholesalers, the regular group, Southern Yons of Spirits, Young's Market, R&DC, whoever it is, big, thick books of wines, tons of things to choose from. And then there's brokers that just go hustle stuff, and they bring in some really amazing things. And so she brought in this gorgeous Cabernet, and I said, and I don't want it to have ratings. I don't ask them to make sure there's ratings. I don't care if there's a rating. I just ask if there is one, just to understand what they've done with it. She goes, no, but do you want one? I'm like, well, so I go, what does that mean?
She's going to shop it around for a rating.
Yeah, she's going to go give it to an MW and say,
Sure.
This got a 98 from so-and-so. And so that kind of defeats the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
That leads to the next conversation. It's a good segue to these celebrity wines. I just read yesterday that Gordon Ramsay came out with a whole brand of, I think they're Central Coast and Monterey-based Pinots and Chardonnays.
Wow. Pinot and Chardonnay, I would expect him to do something honking big, like an Amarone or whatever, and have foul language on the back of the label. Anyway.
So, but it's interesting, right? They're through Siebold, and that's Chris Miller, the famed master somm, and he has a winery himself called Siebold. Now there's a master somm who's making wine, which there are a handful of those guys. And it's interesting to me because, again, we go back to these acronyms. It doesn't mean they're any better winemakers than anybody else because they studied all this. They understand it for sure, but winemaking is science and biology and fermentation science. So it doesn't make it that you're a good winemaker just because you have an MW or MS. But regardless, typically over the years, celebrity-endorsed wines have not worked in America. Have you seen them in Canada, and are they... people care?
Well, we've seen lots of celebrity wines. I don't know that they have that much staying power, because if you're paying a premium for that brand or that celebrity cachet, I'm not sure it's worth it. We talked about this, I believe, on my podcast, but Snoop Dogg has just launched up here in Canada, and you talked about seeing
Cali Red
and the shelves like making its way down in popularity, going to the low shelf. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes up here. Oh, I do know one of our national newspaper columnists said it's so sweet it ruins the finish or whatever. He gave it a really low score, like low for the price. And so I can't imagine that's going to go over well. So, but at the same time, I think there are celebrities who actually care about wine and do a good job. And often their names aren't on the label. If you think the singer Pink, Her brand is Wolf something. And then you've got, well, they divorced, but Brangelina, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie with Miraval, made by a very great winery in the Rhone Valley. So you do have exceptions to the rule, but I find on principle there are exceptions, not usually celebrity wines. They're go-tos.
Well, there's a couple. I have a couple opinions of that. One is, yeah, you're paying a premium. There's no way Gordon Ramsay or Snoop Dogg or anybody else is putting their name on the label without a fee.
Yes,
that's just business. And unfortunately, wine is business. The people that make wine, that grow grapes to make wine, they're in it to make money. We're not going to throw crops away because mildew's coming, and we're not going to sulfite it if we're into that no sulfite type thing. We're going to do it because it's business. We got to put it in the bottle. And I think that's also the premise of a lot of bad wines. There are bad wines out there. They're from bad grapes. There are good grapes that make bad wines too, from the winemaker's point. So they're bottled, or they're sold in bulk, and they're blended with other things to soften them. And you mentioned the sugar content of Snoop Dogg's wine. That's a classic way to do two things. One is make it more approachable for the regular wine drinker. In my experience here at the Wine of the Month Club is, yes, wines that have a little bit of residual sugar in them tend to do pretty well, because they're softer and easier to drink.
Sure.
They're hard to drink a lot of, because eventually this becomes cloying and hard to drink. But the initial expression of the sugar is more approachable. And so that is definitely one of the things that they do to cut, and also to cut the bitterness, right? They put a little bit of sugar in there because the grapes weren't so good in the first place. Yep. But so is he going to call it Cali Red in Canada? Or what does he call it? Something else? Like,
it's got his name on it, Snoop Dogg, and they've got this great big metal statue of him in one of the
do they really?
stores, and he's got corks all at his feet. I don't know what's going on, but you're right. Sugar and oak, often the ketchup of the wine world, used to sort of hide bad grapes or poor winemaking. If you that's all you're tasting, or that's the primary sensation, you probably aren't looking at well-made wine.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between oak that's been infused into the wine through chips or staves to flavor it, versus wines aged in barrel to actually soften it and then give it the nuances. And I think that's important to understand. So this Gordon Ramsay thing, I'm thinking, okay, it's gonna sell some,
Sure.
And I think most of the time that the celebrity approach is that, well, I'm a really special person, and so people will buy it because it's mine. Now, the other day I had a wine. It was from Terrell Owens, a football NFL player, and I'm thinking to myself, I mean, seriously? And I know who made it. I know what I could buy the juice for if I just bought it for myself. Considerably less than that bottle of wine that they want to charge, because Terrell Owens' name's on it. Not dissing Terrell Owens. Wasn't even sure it was his football career, but why would we think that a football player or a basketball player or a golfer's wine has anything to do with anything?
Exactly. Yeah, and there was even a study on this, Paul, at a university here in Canada, Brock, and they did blind panel tastings with different celebrities, except they made the celebrities up. And one was a wrestler, and one was a golf pro, and one was a football,
Really?
and then a hockey. And the wrestler ended up at the bottom, but just as we might expect, the golfer, that genteel, lots of rolling greens, the association was more on brand for wine. So there you go.
Really?
Yeah.
I was actually, I'm going to tell the story because it's really crazy, but I was in an RFP. I was in a proposal mode to be the Professional Golf Association wine club. And so you would think that there's affinity between golf and wine. You would actually think, and I'm going to say this out loud, that there's an affinity between food and wine. Of course there is when we drink and eat, but there really is no marketing affinity. It's very difficult to define that for you, but we have not found over the years of pure marketing business that foodies are necessarily any more better wine buyers as far as quantity and what they like. But regardless, the Golf Association was looking for a club to start, and they felt that there's this huge assimilation between golfers and wine. So I won the bid. I went through a whole presentation, and we're going to start this club. At that time, there were 16 golfers that had wines. And I was invited to Pinehurst and present all the wines to a group of people that were interested in knowing. And this one couple came. She goes, "Oh, we just bought a bottle of I forgot who the golfer was from the clubhouse, and they paid like $30, okay, for this bottle of wine."
Right.
And I was just offered the same juice with the standard label from that winery for $3 a wholesale cost.
Oh no!
Okay?
Oh my gosh!
And I felt so bad for them. They're like, "What do you think of it?" I'm like, I don't know. But none of those golfers have wine still, except for Greg Norman, because he actually owns 2 wineries. So, and Morgan, his daughter, actually manages the wineries and manages the source of the grapes and manages what the wine tastes like. But none of the golfers have wines today. And one of them was really good. It was Fred Couples. I forgot who made the wine, but it was a well-known winery in Napa. But it was a $60 Sangiovese. And if I'm a wine enthusiast, am I going to walk into the wine shop and I know I can at that time spend $60 on a Alexander Valley Silver Oak or Fred Couples Sangiovese?
Right. You know, it's a marketing game, even though if you like Fred Couples, still, it might be a gag gift or whatever the first time. But as you know, Paul, what's on the label sells the first time, what's in the bottle sells the second time. And people need to see the quality for the bucks they're paying.
So the irony of the end of the story is we never started the club. And that was because the poor soul that was the liaison, who used to work for the Golf Association, who thought this idea was going to work and brought it to the PGA and brought me in on it, was walking from the first green to the second tee in a promotional golf tournament with one of the presidents of like Titleist or one of these big companies, and a tree fell and killed him.
Oh no, that's awful.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
And it kind of goes to show you when your time, but they called me immediately because I was one of the last phone calls he had made on his cell phone to discuss this thing. And he had just gotten the contract from the PGA that morning or the morning before, and we were about to discuss the 3-way relationship between the PGA and Wine of the Month Club and him, and it never happened. His name was Bruce Florine. It was really sad, and it was just kind of a crazy end of a story, really.
That is.
Maybe I shouldn't have brought that up and depressed the whole podcast.
Yeah.
So,
well, getting back to golf, of course, the only thing I liked about it was going back to the clubhouse after we had fought our way through the greens and having a nice glass of wine and steak, though they weren't branded. But that's my only association with wine and golf. Right. There we go.
Well, you said that leads me to the next question. We talked about this a little bit before, but worst moment in wine, is there such a thing as that? And what might it be for you that you just said, "Oh my gosh, this is really not happening"?
Oh, so many. Where to start? So for my first book, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, I decided to do the day in the life approach, meaning I worked as a sommelier in a fancy French restaurant. I worked in wine stores. I worked the harvest. So in the restaurant, I thought I'd up the ante, and I'm naturally a nervous, anxious person. And so I thought, why not go for like a 4-diamond restaurant, a French 4-diamond restaurant here? To make myself extra nervous. And so, I was trying to disappear into the wallpaper, but I finally had to flap my baby wings and get out there on the floor and serve people expensive wines, and Bordeaux in particular. And I remember there was this couple, 2 women actually, and they ordered very expensive wine, and I started pouring it, and my hand was shaking so much that I dribbled it on the beautiful white linen tablecloths. And so she didn't even look at me. Her voice and her face just turned really hard. And she kept talking to her friend. And then I said, I'm sorry. And like I was in this slow motion, I'm sorry. And so she refused to look, and she said, "That'll be all." And I felt for the first time what it felt like to be dismissed, like not service, servility. Yeah. And it was just like, oh my God, I'm never going to do this to anyone who makes a mistake in a restaurant ever again. So I just sort of slunk off and had to tell the manager, and he comped, an extra, I think it was either bottle or glass, but it was just so like, oh my God. I
have a solution for that.
Okay.
A wine pouring disc. That'll stop the drift.
I needed you. That's right. I should have come out with I don't know if they would have allowed them in this fancy place, but it'd be like pouring with training wheels. I got my little thing here.
What would you think then as a a wine educator, well, no, not the wine educator, the chief of wine happiness, what would you consider your strongest suit? Like, would it be the education aspect, your tasting skills, your ability to describe wine, which is different for everybody, or pairing things, writing skills obviously are very high in your list.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think, tasting, I don't know. I've been identified as a super taster, which doesn't mean I'm a better taster. It just means I'm a more sensitive one,
Hmm.
more taste buds and that. But I think really what my passion is storytelling. And whether that's through my online courses and trying to connect with people through stories or the writing in the books. I just love stories. Like we've already, you're a great interviewer, Paul. You're bringing the stories out of me, like, sitting down, getting interviewed for McKinsey or whatever, just the one we just covered. But I think that's how people identify with you. No one identifies with cold, hard perfection. Like I know all the vintages of all the, raindrops and
Yeah, right.
everything. So you're sharing your humanity through a story, but you can also embed the wine education through that, and that's really what I love to do. I've said this before, but my mother always put my peas in the mashed potatoes because she was hiding vegetables on me so that I love the creamy potatoes. But that's what I'm trying to do with stories, is like keep someone entertained and interested, but at the same time teach you a lot about wine, whether again through the books or the online courses.
How do you keep that passion going? Because how do you keep yourself educated? What are you doing to keep motivated to know the next step, to understand what's coming in the thing? Like, let's just talk about biodynamic and organic wines for a second. Very popular. People are interested and they're asking questions. What are you doing to learn, to learn about it yourself?
Well, this may be the lazy way out, but I just line up guests on the Unreserved
That's great.
Wine Talk podcast and ask somebody else. And that's the way I educate myself, because I just ask nosy, impertinent questions that I'd never get to ask if I were just at a dinner party with this person. So we'll dig right into biodynamics or orange wines or whatever the latest trend is. But that's the way I learned. I've always, like, being a writer gives you an excuse to nose your way into people's lives and ask them these questions. It gives you access. And that's the way I learned, by keeping curious and staying both neurotic and impertinent.
It's funny. Well, I wouldn't say impertinent, but maybe a little. No, just kidding. Yeah.
Absolutely. The questions I ask.
We talked about Tilar Mazio last time, the author of Hotel Place Vendôme and Widow Clicquot. But that's exactly right. I read her book because I love the stories of the war, and I love Paris, and we love the Ritz, and we love the Bar Hemingway, and so I read this story and I'm enamored, and I find out that she has a winery. So she's on the show. We're talking about wineries. Well, I found out from her that she's part of the raw movement out of London with Isabelle Legeron, and I get a chance to talk to and so we move forward as podcasters and media. Like, well, that was an interesting story. I wonder where I can get to the root of that part of it.
Exactly. One thing branches into another, and you just follow your line of curiosity.
It teaches us a lot. This kind of goes back to, and I keep coming up with more subjects, and we're running out of time here. But we talked about biodynamic wines, and I had a Bordeaux last night that was biodynamic. And it was fabulous, and I would have only known it was biodynamic by the taste, because they're a little brighter, they're a little fresher, they have a little bit more approachable character when they're younger. They don't seem to last as long, right? They don't age well, but they sure are bright. But there are a lot of biodynamic and organic wines that taste like horse manure, and I'm
That's
guessing
barnyard.
this. And maybe
You got to use the fancy term.
Yeah, barnyard, right? Well, now they have the poop emoji. I got to make a horse poop emoji, and maybe
Yeah,
we'll
that's
start
right.
using
Get
that.
specific. What type of poop is it? Come
Exactly. So it gets, and so I keep thinking, I don't know if this generation, and my daughter, who's the baker in New York, loves orange wines, and she actually taught me about them when they first came out. I had never even heard of them, and I'm thinking, this generation, they're stomaching these wines because a lot of them just aren't that good.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a long time, as you've probably learned with your podcasting and your reading experience, for a winery, let's say the 3 years minimum to become certified organic, or the 3 years minimum to become certified biodynamic. Doesn't mean you make good wine from it.
Right.
It just means that you're processing the grapes and you're processing in the winery to the standards that certification allows you. But it takes a long time to understand when you've converted a winery from conventional to organic or biodynamic what those grapes are going to do, what they're going to taste like, how are we going to make the best wine from those new grapes that no longer that are different from the ones that we grew before. Have you tasted some of these things and found them just to be really hard to stomach? Yeah, swallow. Better word, swallow.
Yeah, exactly. Sure, there have been some real ugly babies in the glass. And, whether it's natural, raw, orange, I mean, there's just some weird stuff out there. But I recognize, there's a whole world of taste and diversity in drinkers as there is in glasses of wine. What I don't agree with is funkiness or weirdness for the sake of it. Like, it's just, a wine should still be well made without faults. It should try to be typical of where it's from. But just being, it's like anything in music, books, and so on. You can be avant-garde, but that can't be the only virtue of what you're creating. It's got to deliver some message, some pleasure, something beyond. I'm just different. I'm weird.
Great way to put it.
Yeah. Okay, good.
That was very articulate, because who has not been to the natural food market and bought carrots or turnips or something and just gone, these just don't taste that good. They're just not that great.
But they're
just
on trend. They're very trendy. Yes.
Just because they're organic doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You were talking about doing a giveaway.
Yes.
And so I have a text number for the listeners, and we'll have to let this run for a little bit as the downloads multiply. And we're going to run a contest. So if you're listening and you want to win Natalie McLean's what?
My ultimate guide to pairing food and wine. So it's kind of template driven. So it's meant to be a simple reference that you can use in the kitchen. And so it's all styles of wine, all styles of food.
Wow, looks pretty comprehensive.
Squeeze in there, yes. And I just find it gives people guidelines. No hard and fast rules, because the first rule, of course, somebody said it, pair the wine to the diner, not the dinner. But if you want a jumping off point, these will give you some areas to look for the wine. If you know the food, here's what might work wine-wise, and vice versa. So that's
really fun. Yeah. We're very generous. Texting to 626-210-2380, and I'll repeat that in a minute, to enter the contest to win Natalie McLean's food pairing guide. And just put in Natalie in the text, and we'll know who it is, and we will draw your name from a hat, and you can win a set of pairing guides, which is an important part of what we do, because, and I'm going to go back to a conversation I had with Jonathan Waxman, the famed chef. Around here, and we'll close with this thought, it's not that long ago that my aha moment, and I've been doing this for 30 years, but the aha moment of and I'm going to move the direction of what I do when I get home. It used to be, honey, what are we having? Or what can I make? And then I'd open the wine. And now when I get home, it's like, what do I feel like drinking? Do I feel like this Canary Islands red? Or do I feel like a fine Burgundy and spend $300 on a bottle of wine? Or do I feel like my regular Bordeaux, from the Bordeaux Club? What do I feel like drinking? Or in other words, how do I want to feel after I drink this? And then I worry about what's for dinner. And Jonathan Waxman said, yeah, that's what we do. I open what I want to drink, and then I open the fridge and see what's going on in there to see if anything works. Is that happening at your house?
Absolutely. I'm an earrings first kind of gal, and then I choose the outfit. So wine is always first. Not that wine is just an accessory, thank you very much, but definitely, I lead with wine, and then I figure out what can fit with this, the food, the people, the place. Definitely, I'm a wine first kind of person.
I think it's a fun approach, and I encourage listeners to start thinking that way and having a variety of wines on their shelf at different price ranges, depending how they feel, to experience the character. Natalie, it's been a huge pleasure having you on the show. I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, Paul. I would love to. I've loved the chat we had on Unreserved Wine Talk podcast, and this one, I just think we could talk for hours. I know we could.
We could.
One thing I should note, though, with your listeners, or viewers, everyone can get this. It's not a contest. If they
Okay.
go to nataliemclean.com/WOM, as in wine of the month. So it's
Please.
not just one person who will get it.
Right.
It's everybody who wants it can get it at, as I said, nataliemclean.com/WOM.
NatalieMcLean.com. That's Natalie, I-E, MacLean, MacLean.com.
Yes. And no H's, Natalie.
I have to get, I think I have PaulCallumCairn.com, but I don't think there's anything on it.
Okay. There you go. I know, like, choose a name. What was my mother thinking? How about just Pat Smith? Pat Smith is good, Mom.
Cheers and thanks again. I hope to see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Cheers to you too.
Take care.
Bye for now.